The Obama administration celebrates 1 million Obamacare sign-ups in December. We'll tell you about the numbers that are not being celebrated. This is Special Report. And good evening, I'm John Roberts in for Brett Baer. If you make a list of people who will be happy to see 2013 in the rearview mirror, President Obama is probably pretty close to the top of that list. Almost 3 months after the disastrous rollout of his namesake health care plan, new statistics indicate more people are signing up. But there's more to the story behind the numbers. White House correspondent Wendell Goler is traveling with the president in Honolulu and begins with another shakeup in the Obamacare bureaucracy. Hi, Wendell.
Aloha, John. The chief operating officer for the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is the agency that implemented Obamacare, is retiring. Officials say it's for personal reasons, and they suggest the troubled rollout is not the cause. Michelle Snyder had put off her retirement for a year at the request of her boss, but the malfunctioning Obamacare website turned it into an unfortunate year and left HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius defending her at the end of October.
Michelle Snyder is the one responsible for this debacle.
Well, excuse me, Congresswoman, Michelle Snyder is not responsible for the debacle. Hold me accountable for the debacle.
Okay.
I'm responsible.
The December increase in signups was welcome news for a president preparing to wrap up a politically tough year in his home state of Hawaii. With the healthcare.gov website functioning much better, nearly 1 million more people enrolled this month. But a spokesman for House Speaker John Boehner said, quote, this so-called surge in enrollment still didn't meet the goal for December. In fact, combined with state exchange enrollments, it still left the administration more than 1 million people short of its goal of more than 3 million signups. And experts say most of those people have yet to pay their first premiums.
To actually enroll in health insurance, you have to pay that first month's premium. And the most recent feedback we've gotten from the insurers is that about 5 to 15% of people who've selected a plan have actually paid that first month's premium.
And though the December surge suggests the website's problems have been fixed, experts see troubling news in who is enrolling.
If you look at the demographic data, the underlying trends and who's enrolling, there's evidence that's less healthy. It's a less healthy population than what the plans certainly hope for, and probably older.
That could mean the administration isn't having the success it hoped for, convincing young, healthy people who often don't feel the need for health insurance to actually pay for it.
The way Obamacare works is it requires healthy people to pay a lot more for insurance so that sicker people can pay less. That's a great deal for sicker people, not necessarily for healthy people.
The problem with that is that a pool of older, less healthy people will mean higher costs for insurance companies. That would mean more expensive premiums for everyone, and those higher premiums would be tacked on in 2015 and could fuel even more Republican complaints about Obamacare and scare more young people away from signing up. John?
Wendell Goler doing hardship duty in Honolulu for us tonight. Wendell, thanks so much. The FAA has announced the 6 states that will develop test sites for expanded drone use. Alaska, Nevada, New York, North Dakota, Texas, and Virginia will each host research facilities. The FAA is working to develop operational guidelines for commercial use of the drones by the end of 2015. Significant pushback tonight from a New York Times report disputing the role of al-Qaeda in last year's deadly attack on the U.S. diplomatic facility in Benghazi, Libya. Senior correspondent Adam Housley is following the story tonight.
15 months after the September 11th attack in Benghazi, which killed Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans, the New York Times offered a new narrative that claims in part there was no involvement from al-Qaeda or any other international terror group, and that an anti-Islam video played a role in inciting the initial wave of attacks. Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, said that the Times portrayal is just not accurate.
The individuals on the ground talked about a planned tactical movement on the compound. Even this is the compound before they went to the annex. All of that would directly contradict what the New York Times definitively says was an exhaustive investigation. Tells me they didn't talk to people on the ground who were doing the fighting, the shooting, and the intelligence gathering.
Rogers' committee has heard from a number of attack survivors in recent weeks, and Democrat member Adam Schiff said that while the Times report adds some value, it's also deficient.
I do think it adds some valuable insights. I agree with Mike that, however, the intelligence indicates that al-Qaeda was involved. But there were also plenty of people and militias that were unaffiliated with al-Qaeda that were involved.
Sources who continue to face threats of losing their jobs and thus remain anonymous sharply challenged the Times findings, telling Fox News, quote, "It was a coordinated attack. It is completely false to say anything else. It is completely a lie." And, quote, "Guys were coming into the compound, moving left, moving right, and using IMT, individual movement techniques. That's not a spontaneous attack." Today, the State Department seemed to agree with the Times report, but also parsed words when stating that, quote, "core al-Qaeda was not involved."
Obviously, these groups all espouse a certain kind of extremist and terrorist ideology. Clearly, these were violent folks on the ground. There are 4 Americans who are no longer with us who I think would speak exactly to that fact, right? These were clearly terrorists.
Fox News has also learned that there were a number of briefings held, including one just one day before the attack by the head of counterintelligence for the entire region, identifying al-Qaeda as the largest and most significant element infiltrating Libya. John?
Adam Housley reporting for us tonight. Adam, thanks so much. A German magazine is reporting on a special hacking unit of the NSA. Der Spiegel writes the hackers intercept computer deliveries, exploit hardware vulnerabilities, and even hijack Microsoft's internal reporting system to spy on their targets. We'll begin there with our special guest tonight, former NSA and CIA Director, retired General Michael Hayden, who is now with the Chertoff Group. General, good to see you.
Hi, John.
So Der Spiegel talks about the Tailored Access Operations Wing of the NSA. It's designed to crack the uncrackable, know the unknowable, get the ungettable, basically hack into computer systems around the world to get information about what other people are doing. This is a system, an operational unit that you are very familiar with because it was online when you were running the NSA. But I think a lot of people tonight are very surprised about the extent of the capabilities of the NSA and some of what they're doing.
Well, I'm surprised they're surprised. And I think the totality of the Der Spiegel article points out that when it comes to electronic surveillance, Keith Alexander and his folks out at NSA are pretty good at this, and that's really good news for the American people. John, look, here's the major muscle movement. Traditional signals intelligence used to be passive and what we call midpoint. Someone decided to send a message, you tried to get between A and B, and you hoped that message hit your antenna too. Right? What's happened with the digital age, with the World Wide Web, with interconnectivity, is we've gone to active SIGINT and no longer intercept at the midpoint, but go to the endpoint. Go to a point where sometimes they have not even yet decided to transmit. I mean, that's what's going on here, and it's a good thing for American security and American liberty.
The person who was in charge of the TAO unit, and a lot of people are calling it the TAO of the NSA, but it's actually TAO, said in the Der Spiegel article, and this was an anonymous quote, "Some of the most significant intelligence our country has ever seen has been owing to TAO, and the TAO's goal is to achieve, quote, pervasive, persistent access on the global network." How much potential damage to that capability do you think has been done now that the TAO is out there in the public eye?
Well, look, no intelligence organization in the world likes their sources and methods, their tactics, techniques, and procedures published in the open domain. And now we'll see that legitimate foreign intelligence targets will read these kinds of articles and begin to take precautions that will make it more difficult for the American security services to defend the United States.
A lot of companies woke up yesterday morning, read this article and said, oh my goodness, what's going on out there? Because the NSA is intercepting web pages and websites like LinkedIn to try to send false messages and malware through an intercept. It's also intercepting shipments of computers that are destined for overseas, modifying them. It's hacking into, as we said, Microsoft's reporting system. Whenever Microsoft Windows crashes and you get that error bug send message, they send that could send information. And it's also tapping into Cisco routers, prompting Cisco to come out with a statement just a little while ago saying it's very concerned about this. It's launching an investigation. The implication here is that the NSA is appropriating U.S. technology and exploiting it for intelligence purposes, and U.S. companies aren't really appreciative of that.
No, and a careful reading of the Der Spiegel article, and believe me, I read it very carefully with my antenna very much up to see if there's anything in there that should legitimately concern or outrage the American people, and I couldn't find it. This was about targeting legitimate foreign intelligence targets, and the fact that they make they use American-made equipment is interesting but not compelling. I mean, the fact that a legitimate foreign intelligence target uses a Cisco router shouldn't be a safe haven for that foreign intelligence target. Now, I'm actually pleased that these organizations, these American companies, are surprised, and they should be surprised. They had nothing to do with this. This was American intelligence.
Spying overseas is one thing. Can Americans be absolutely assured that this is all happening overseas and none of this is happening here at home?
Again, even reading this grand expose in Der Spiegel, looking for any suggestions, even Der Spiegel isn't suggesting this was done against Americans. That Microsoft point you make, if you read the article carefully, this is about those warnings and, you know, kind of the phone home mechanism in Microsoft software on already targeted foreign computers. I hope we're following that kind of information.
Let's turn to Benghazi, because you were talking about this yesterday on one of the Sunday programs. We have information from people who are on the ground in Benghazi during that attack on the consulate that the New York Times article is flat out wrong, that there were al-Qaeda connections among the people who were there that night targeting the compound. What do you say?
Yeah, look, this is starting to resemble one of those medieval theological discussions about how many angels or how many jihadists you can get on the head of a pin. Look, there are 2 or 3 things we know for sure. Number one, this was a terrorist attack. This was not a peaceful demonstration that went south. Number 2, who did it? John, a few days after the attack, I said this was almost certainly, well, al-Qaeda is organized kind of into 3 movements: al-Qaeda Prime, al-Qaeda affiliated, and like-minded. I said a couple of days after the attack, this was almost certainly either high-end like-minded or low-end affiliated.
But that is not, as the New York Times said, no al-Qaeda.
Oh, no, and I agree. But look,
So are they wrong in saying there was no al-Qaeda connection?
You know, it depends on your meaning of the word al-Qaeda. And I think if you take that back to my argument about angels on the head of a pin, if you take that narrow theological definition, look, no one has suggested that somebody with a Motorola push-to-talk in the Hindu Kush was sending detailed instructions to somebody in Benghazi. And the final point, John, is really important. And it's about the broader narrative, all right? This pushes against the president's narrative that al-Qaeda is in retreat, al-Qaeda is on the run, the tide of war is receding. And no matter how you parse out what happened in Benghazi, globally, you can see, and this is quoting The Economist now from a few months ago, al-Qaeda controls more territory and has more adherents today than at any other time in its history. That's the important
It certainly changes the face of the war on terror. Time is growing short, General, but I do want to make one more point here that the Weekly Standard pointed out, we'll have Stephen Hayes on because he talked about this earlier in the Weekly Standard, that this analysis contradicts the Times' own reporting from an October 29th, 2012 article in which the New York Times wrote, quote, 3 congressional investigations and a State Department inquiry are now examining the attack, which American officials said included participants from Ansar al-Sharia, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and the Mohammed Jamal Network, a militant group in Egypt, which is known to have ties to al-Qaeda. So this contradicts even what the New York Times said a year ago.
Yeah, I think it does, and I read Steve's piece, and I think it's very carefully done. But again, John, if we're looking for membership cards here before we say they're part of this global jihadist movement, we're actually wasting our time.
Right. General Hayden, it's always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for stopping by tonight, and Happy New Year to you.
And to you.
Up next, terrorism in Russia, just ahead of the Winter Olympics. But first, here's some of what our Fox affiliates are covering tonight. Fox 5 here in Washington on the firing of 2-time Super Bowl winning head coach Mike Shanahan by the NFL's Redskins. Shanahan is one of 5 coaches to get the axe since the end of the regular season yesterday. Fox 5 in New York City with preparations in Times Square for tomorrow night's big New Year's Eve party. The square will host millions of people, as it does every year, counting down the last few seconds of 2013. And this is a live look at Philadelphia from our Fox affiliate there, WTXF. The big story in Philadelphia tonight, setting of bail at $250,000 for a Roman Catholic priest whose conviction in the clergy sex abuse scandal was overturned by a Pennsylvania appeals court. And that is tonight's live look outside the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back.